Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for this session. Some of you might have attended the talk from the minister just now. In this session, we'll focus much more on an open discussion on a Q&A. But first of all, let me welcome both Minister Dr. Bang Mang, who's been with the ministry for now close to 5 years, but before that has had a distinguished career in academics. He was the Dean of the Faculty of Economics, so he brings in that perspective of economics that we find really in the government circles. And then we have with us Pak Mirza, who's the Senior Deputy Governor for Bank of Indonesia. But he as well has been a leading practitioner in the industry, so he comes from a background in the securities industry and in trading. And he's also a Credit Suisse alum, so he has a special place at Credit Suisse. With that, I'll just start with our conversation. I'll ask a few questions. We'll probably run that for about 20-25 minutes. And after that, we'll open to the audience and take questions from you guys and just keep the conversation going. So let me start with the one question for the minister. There's been a lot of policy announcements in the past 6 months, 3 months, actually 4 months now, including some of the very difficult ones, which were like cutting the fuel subsidy. It's been a thorn on the side of government for about 5 years. Mm-hmm. Very bold steps were taken. Then bringing all the licensing into BI, into Board of Investment, making that easier. Now you've announced a bunch of policies just last week on controlling, like helping to control the currency, the current account and all that. So all of that is there. But what is for the next, if we look forward for the, let's say, next 6 months to 12 months, what is the 1 or 2 key priorities of the government, and what are the results that you'd like to see over that time?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I believe, as I mentioned in my presentation, for those of you who are in the next room, our focus this year is still on the stability. So for the next 6 or 12 months, stability will still on the top of our priority in terms of macroeconomic management. And on the heart of the stability issue, again, is the current account deficit. In the past, we started to deal with this issue of current account deficit, especially when we had the taper tantrum back in mid-2013. But then at the time, we focused only on the trade balance side of our current account deficit. This time around, we started to go deeper and to look at the more structural level, in which we have to address the issue of the big deficit, both in the service account as well as income account. Of course, part of the policies that we issued last week, for example, the incentive for reinvestment instead of sending the dividend or profit back to the headquarters or to original country, is part of reducing the deficit in income account. Every second quarter of the year, we usually have kind of pressure towards rupiah. And it's simply because the demand for dollar is quite high due to the repatriation of the dividend. So, of course, we cannot stop that, but we now offer the incentive. So whenever they have the interest to reinvest, I'll give them the higher tax allowance than any regular investors in Indonesia. So by doing that, hopefully the pressure to rupiah will be easing a little bit, and it gives some room to improvement in current account deficit. The other would be the tourism side. As I mentioned, we now open for 45 countries, no visa required whenever citizen of those countries visiting Indonesia, and the idea to improve the service account. So the next step, as you asked, is how to continue the reform on this service and the income account. So for example, now we are thinking to develop our reinsurance, our domestic reinsurance industry, rather than all the outflow going to the reinsurance company overseas. Of course, we don't want everything to be retained in Indonesia, but at least there has to be, a better and more mature reinsurance industry domestically. So if you ask me what kind of reform, this is the reform that we are going to continue, including giving some kind of better tax treatment for shipping industry, so our deficit in freight will be also lower.
So, Atpak, when you were presenting just now, you were giving some pretty aggressive growth targets, right? For next year, more than 6%, then eventually up to 8% in 2018.
Yeah.
If the focus stays so much on the current account and stability, then isn't there a disconnect between that and a very aggressive growth target? Even 5.8% this year it seems, at least right now, seems fairly aggressive.
Yeah, I think, of course, if we are doing so-called business as usual, that might be conflicting to each other. And if you remember, in the past, the issue of stability will be basically tightening the fiscal policy as well as monetary policy. But this time around, when we have released the burden of the fuel subsidy from our budget, we have larger fiscal space, we can allocate more for infrastructure, and then we open more for private sector involvement in infrastructure, as well as promoting our SOE by giving capital injection, again, to accelerate infrastructure development. Basically, what you will see in the next 5 years is government investment-based growth. And, I mean, the infrastructure will take a significant part, but the other side, of course, we also promote our FDI more on manufacturing. Of course, there will be pressure on import, but as I mentioned, if we only deal with the trade balance, our structural problem in current account deficit will never end. We need now to attack the more structural problem of our current account deficit, which in the service account and in the in the income account. And I think that should not disrupt, our intention to create the growth. Again, stability is number one, but maybe when the time goes, let's say 1 year from now or 2 years from now, our priority on stability will be less. And then we can slightly put the growth on the higher priority.
So, Pak Mirza, how does that priority in terms of stability right now and growth a little bit later on, but a lot of focus on investment, which obviously has implications for the current account in terms of machinery imports, probably some steel imports and all that. How does that kind of picture in the policy making that you are thinking about, especially from a currency point of view, current account point of view, interest rates?
From the monetary point of view, we together with the governments, we agree that for this year is the theme is still the same with last year, that stability is a priority, and stability meaning inflations and current account deficits, and then corporate offshore debts. Yeah, because Bank Indonesia mandate is about stability of rupiah value, and rupiah value meaning on the domestic is we have to contain inflations, and on the external balance we have to control current account deficits. So that's why our policy stand is still in the tight bias, policy. So when we cut interest rate in February, I think there was a misperception in the market that the market thought that Bank Indonesia start the easing cycle, but actually when we cut interest rate in February, just because when we increase interest rate in November, at that time we didn't know that the government is going to implement the energy reform. That's basically now fuel price is floating. So in November, our estimation, inflation in January and inflation in February, and there was a risk that inflation going to additional risk 200 basis point from 4.7% plus 200 basis point because of the LPG increase for 3 kilogram, and then for electricity for the poor also increase. But then governments introduce floating fuel price, energy reform, and then the government say that there is no increase in the LPG for the poor, and then electricity for the poor. So our inflation's outlook suddenly significantly changed. to around 4%, 4.5%. So that's why we cut in February. But that's not, it doesn't mean that beginning of the easing cycle, because we still have the current account deficit situation that we are trying to contain not more than 3% of GDP.
But Pak Mirza, if I look at the market consensus forecast on inflation going into the next 2-3 quarters, including our own economist forecast, it seems that inflation should be falling quite significantly over the next 1 or 2 quarters, partly because of the base effect last year, but also because the core inflation in Indonesia seems to be quite under control. So if we go by that by the end of this year, we'll be running more than maybe 3% real rates, and that probably is going to be the highest in Asia. Do you think that for the kind of growth that we're looking at and basically are reviving a bit of the economy, that rate is reasonable, or you think high? Or, I mean, how do you look at a very high, relatively high real interest rate environment?
In terms of inflations, the new energy reform that's already improved the inflation structures in Indonesia. Because if you look 2005, 2008, 2013, 2014, Indonesia inflation always shoot up when the government cut fuel subsidies. So basically the administered price, that's the one that make the inflation above 5%. Now with the energy reform, no more subsidy. So Indonesia, there is a high possibility that Indonesia can have inflation 4 to 5%. So probably even below 4% for the in the futures. But again, current account deficit is still we don't want the current account deficit to be above 3%. If India can reduce current account deficit quite significant, and our neighbor like Thailand and Philippines, even Philippines has a current account surplus. So we think that investors prefer to see Indonesia to have a manageable current account deficit, not more than 3%. Yeah. And then we still have another FOMC meeting in April, FOMC meeting in June. What we notice every time there is a FOMC meeting, for example in December and then in March, there is a jittery in the markets. So we don't want to send a wrong signal to the market that Bank Indonesia is start easing. No.
Okay. Minister Bambang, one of the things that has been kind of a lot has been discussed in the local press, at least maybe not so much in international press, and is a concern for a lot of us, is that if I look at the 2015 revised budget, the tax revenue targets are very high, right? And you mentioned a little bit about that in your previous presentation. It's close to a slightly more than 30% increase in taxes. It seems like for any Asian country seems very, very high, right? And you're trying to achieve that without actually implementing any new taxes, which seems even more difficult because, okay, if you slap 10 more taxes and you get revenue from there, okay, that's understandable. But expanding the tax base and all that is a very complicated, difficult situation. So 2 questions on that. One is that how do you plan to do it? The second is that if there's a shortfall, what is the backup plan? What gets cut, or are there any other kind of backup sources of revenue that you're keeping secret, you haven't told the public as yet? So.
Okay, I think there are 2 basic information that we should be aware when we are talking about tax revenue in Indonesia. First of all, our tax ratio is relatively low compared to even our ASEAN neighbors or either other emerging economies. Last year, our tax ratio was only 11%. And you know very well, whenever we are talking about a low tax ratio, it's not about the low economic capacity of Indonesia itself. It is more about the low capacity of the tax collection effort, as well as the low tax base. So it's quite clear there is a fundamental problem in tax collection effort in Indonesia, rather than about the up and down of the economy. The second fact is that the growth of 30%, as I mentioned in the previous presentation, was not the first time in history. We did that in 2008 when we issued so-called sunset policy. And for this 2015, of course, there are things that we are going to do seriously. And one of them we are going to introduce some kind of sunset policy, especially for every taxpayers, individual as well as corporate, for the last 5 years. And then for this time, we are not going to impose any penalty. So basically, every taxpayer needs to pay just the gap between the amount they are supposed to pay and the amount that they have paid in the last 5 years. Of course, now we have better data in terms of the size of the data and accuracy of the data. So whenever we counter every individual taxpayers, then we already know how much the gap that should be fulfilled by every individual taxpayers. So it means what we are going to do in 2015 will be even better than in 2008. Because in 2008, we don't have the data and everything is voluntary. Now it's basically kind of mandatory for every taxpayers, and we have the data. So it means the asymmetry information doesn't happen this time, unlike in 2008. And of course, I think your question is valid. What happens if the tax revenue is not at the target? Of course, we might combine that with some kind of, revenues. I mean, it could be maybe some little additional revenue, a little bit from the natural resources. I mean, it might, because, with the new system of the budget, whenever we have 100 rupiah depreciation, the revenue will increase by 2.5 trillion rupiah. So that would contribute a little bit, and we have some spares in the budget to cover for any emergency. And we still have so-called government accumulated surplus that can still be used whenever we have higher deficit, and possibly some additional financing, especially now new government plans to look back and revitalize our bilateral and multilateral loan, something that has been ignored for the last 10 years. Now we are trying to revitalize that. And of course, there could be additional potential financing from that sources. From spending side, of course, there should be efficiency, especially from the operational spending. I think there's still room to cut the operational spending. And I believe, although there might be improvement in terms of capital expenditure absorption, there might be some space that they cannot execute the projects. Yeah. So by doing this management from both revenue and spending side, of course, we will try our best to maintain the balance, the budget deficit below 3% as mandated by the law. Now we have 1.9%, but we're trying to reduce the budget deficit as big as possible. Yeah.
Somebody from the ministry tells me that you also have a secret fund of about 0.5% of GDP, that if revenues fall, you put that reserve and you're going to use
that. Yeah, that's the accumulated surplus.
Okay.
It's not really secret,
Okay, now it's not, so that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so then just one thing, that if that happens, like hopefully we keep it at 1.9 and maybe around 2.2 if there's a little bit of slippage, then current account stays a little bit under control, hopefully around 3 or below that. But Mirza, if there are slippages, let's say on those sides, yeah, and let's say we have some tax collection issues, we have 40% of our bond holdings with foreign holders, right? And then obviously if that becomes a concern, not just because of high holding, but also with the currency volatility, and that's why you're focused so much partly on currency. Is there a psychological level or a line in the sand that basically this is where we want the rupiah to be, and beyond that it's an issue? And how do you think about this foreign holding and how to manage that?
In our view, theoretically, if Indonesia inflation, say this year 4%, 4.5%, and then US inflation say 1.5%, so meaning depreciation is around 3 to 3.5% is tolerable for Indonesia, yeah. And so depreciation above that level, we think is not tolerable. But if that's only temporary because of the current market jittery of the FOMC meeting April and on June, so that's still acceptable for us. But beyond that level, we think is not acceptable. That's why we are always in the markets, yeah, because Indonesia foreign exchange market is not a big market. Interbank market for spot is around $1 billion to $2 billion a day, and if you combine with corporate demand and supply, maybe $3 to $5 billion a day, compared to our neighbor like Thailand and Malaysia, around $12 to $15 billion a day. So that's why during turbulence, that's why we are in the market, yeah, to give supply and then to reduce volatility, yeah. So Indonesia going forward, how to reduce this 40%? Actually, we are not unique. I think like Poland, Mexico also has high foreign ownership. Our neighbor like Malaysia also has high foreign ownership in the bonds markets. But in the future, what Indonesia must do is, first is of course to develop our mutual fund industry and insurance industry, and then that will reduce dependency from the foreign market. And like Minister said that the governments plan to reduce paper issuance and then replace it partly with the multilateral and bilateral loans. Yeah.
Okay. A slightly more structural question, Pak Mirza, for you is that we have already loan to deposit ratio touching close to 90, for some banks higher, some banks lower, but on average around 90%. But if you look at the deposit to GDP ratio in Indonesia, is still very, very low, right? So first of all, and what is the structural reason? Because this seems to be like a dichotomy, a kind of odd situation here. The second is that if deposit to GDP stays low, then does that mean that we are structurally going into a low loan growth environment? Because if you can't grow deposits, then you can't grow loans eventually. So how are you thinking of this from a structural point of view for the economy?
In Indonesia, during booming time, when loans growth was 25% to 30%, deposit growth always lower than the loans growth. Say if 25% loans growth and then deposit growth was only 20 or 18%. So that's why the LDR is creeping up and now is 90%. But with loans growth around 12% to 15%, then deposit growth can be at the same pace with the loans growth. So how to funding the high loans growth? How to funding the high loans growth? In our view, there has to be we have to develop the non-deposit market. We have to develop non-deposit market, and that's meaning financial market depending. That's why we at the central bank, also with the colleague at the Ministry of Finance and also with OJK, Indonesia FSA, we are pushing for debt market, corporate debt markets, including to push banking sector to issue non-deposit instrument, for example, certificate of deposit or corporate bonds. Now we will allow banks in their LDR calculation, it's not LDR anymore, but loan to funding ratio. So in the funding, we will include deposit plus issuance of paper. So that's will pushing the banking sector to issue paper rather than chasing the deposits. But again, the question is who will buy the paper? So who will buy the paper? Because our mutual funds and insurance industry is still relatively small. So again, we have to encourage flows from overseas, yeah. But again, the key is to attract flows from overseas. We have to have the same tax rate, buying government bonds and buying corporate bonds. Now the tax is different, yeah. So that's we have to push for the same tax structures. and also we have to maintain disciplines of macro monetary policy, because to attract overseas flows without disciplined monetary and macro policy is difficult to have sustainability.
So what would that lead to? I mean, what's the target, do you think, that optimally banks can grow credit this year and next year?
This year we estimate around 14 to 16. Yeah, I think maximum is 17%. So far around 12%, 11.5%. That's during this uncertainty. Yeah, but usually second semester growth is higher than the first semester growth for loans and economic growth.
Any priority sectors that you're kind of guiding banks? I know that's more kind of now OJK looks at that more, but from your point of view, any particular sectors or segments of the economy where you want that credit to be routed, if at least from your point of view, where it's needed in the economy?
Has to be export and non-commodity sectors. Yeah.
Minister, one question just again on a structural side is that we did a fairly detailed demographic study, and it's available on the library as well. And one of the things that's coming out in that is that demographics for Indonesia are very positive. We're getting into that bulge where the population is young, employed. It can create a lot of dividends for the economy. But one of the big constraints is that the education and the skill level of the population is not high enough to be useful in the service sector and more complicated manufacturing sector. So there's no, and there doesn't seem to be a short term, so obviously you need to invest in education, but short term in the next 3 to 5 years, how do we kind of bridge that gap, especially if you're looking for, as you said, manufacturing exports to increase, service sector to increase, income side of the GDP deficit to decrease? How do you match that mismatch?
Yeah, I think in terms of the human resources development, according to our law, we already allocate around 20% of our total budget just for education, because this is already earmarked for education. And 2016, we'll try to fulfill the 5% for the health. So I think that's the basic that we need to fulfill first. Regarding the short-term measures, I think we know very well that 2016 will be the first year of the implementation of ASEAN Economic Community. And of course, this is a wake-up call for everybody, for every single individual Indonesian workers, that they need to be more competitive. I think now we, at least from education side, we trying to promote so-called the more professional education, meaning that if you, let's say, graduated as engineer, it's not enough to be just a bachelor of engineering, but more importantly, you need to get some kind of professional certification that you are a professional engineer who can work not only in Indonesia but also in ASEAN. So now we require that kind of certification for many types of so-called professions, medical doctor as well, accountant, So by doing that, hopefully the capacity of our professional level will increase. In broader term, let's say for kind of skilled workers, now we invest more, not only just education in general, but more on vocational. So we're trying to create more skillful labor for many areas, that will be in direct connection with the needs for the job market. So I think by doing this, hopefully in very short period of time, we can catch up with other ASEAN countries, in order to compete for ASEAN Economic Community. At the same time, of course, it will help in absorbing this young population into the job market. Because if you have a demographic bonus or demographic dividend, but you cannot create enough jobs for them, then it will be a disaster. So we really need to pay attention to this issue, and by doing these two things that I just mentioned, I believe part of the problem will be solved.
Okay. Thank you, Pak Mirza, and thank you, Pak Bambang. I think we can open up for audience. We have about 20 minutes for Q&A. So if there are questions from the audience, we can take, and I think there are people with the mics who can get one to you if you have a question.
Sorry, I just wanted to come back to the currency. Mr. Nasir, you were just mentioning earlier, asking them, is there a kind of a pain threshold for the exchange rate that you're monitoring? Can you come back to that and give us some guidance on that?
Sorry?
So I think the question is that on the currency again, that is there a pain threshold, like a number in mind that, okay, is it 13,000, like where it hit in the Asian currency crisis, or somewhere where basically you'll come in and just draw the line in the sand and defend it?
You want to start first?
Indonesia is a floating exchange rate regime, right? But because of the market is not liquid enough, the currency market, the volume in the currency market is not liquid enough. That's why we are in the market to basically to smoothening the volatility. Yeah. So again, like I said that, theoretically, if US inflation say 1.5 and then Indonesia inflation say 4 to 4.5, say 4.5 minus 1.5, so depreciation above 3%, above 3.5% is already too much, yeah. But we think this is temporary because of this everybody waiting for the again FOMC meeting in April, okay, and that's we believe this is a temporary, just like what happened when Governor Bernanke statement about tapering, May, June, July, Augustus in 2013. That's temporary, right? So what exchange rate? We are in the market. We have been in the market. 12.8 we are in the market. 12.9 we were in the market. 13,000 we were in the market.
Okay, maybe.
Because basically to reduce the volatility.
Yeah. I think from government point of view, of course, we want to have strengthening rupiah, but for that strengthening rupiah, we need quote unquote underlying reason, and that underlying reason, of course, it has to be with the fiscal policy that is supportive for that underlying reason. So reducing current account deficit has been part of our fiscal policy, and that part will, of course, helping whenever rupiah has to face some kinds of volatility against strengthening US dollar. That has been shown by Philippines, by India, and by Thailand at the same time when rupiah facing depreciation. Secondly, of course, maintaining the low budget deficit, and third, of course, maintaining low inflation. So by doing this kind of supporting fiscal policy, basically supporting to the underlying factor of the rupiah, of course, what government is doing is basically one way, how to strengthen the rupiah. But of course, it won't be like one night, action or one night event, because as you know, we have to deal with the volatility of the currency as well as the fundamental of our economy.
Yeah, I believe that when we pass this FOMC meeting, all this uncertainty about U.S. interest rate in the second quarter, and then people will go back again to look at the fundamental. And the fundamental, like the minister say that the government focus on the investment, accelerate the infrastructure developments, and then improving the services sector, the income sector of the balance of payments. And then we are at the monetary side, we maintain prudentiality in terms of how to reduce current account deficit. So I think, just focus on the fundamentals, that the government and the monetary authority do.
Hi, I have a quick question about one of your regulations, BI 16, that as far as we could interpret, has significant limitations about domestic issuers in Indonesia being able to access the foreign capital markets. Can you clarify that and explain whether or not the expectation is the local bank facilities and the bond market locally are expected to backstop all those hundreds of potential issuers that aren't going to be able to access the high yield market?
I think what's maybe people again is misinterpret. So we issue regulation about corporate offshore debt in December. Why we issue regulation about corporate offshore debt? Because we noticed that during the QE and then improvement of Indonesia credit rating, corporate offshore debts increased from 70 billions to 163 billions within 5 years, 2009 to 2014. While government's offshore debt is very much under control. So the foreign debt to GDP is still okay, around 32-34%, both combined governments and corporate. But debt service ratio, we think is already a bit too high for corporates. So that's why we issue prudentiality for corporate offshore debts. That basically we don't limit corporate to issue offshore debts, because offshore debt is also important for Indonesian economy. But we ask them to hedge, and we don't ask them to hedge all the 100% of the foreign liability, but basically foreign liability minus foreign asset. So the net foreign liability, they have to hedge the borrowing that maturing 3 to 6 months. 3 to 6 months, yeah. So we don't limit them to borrow offshores, and they can hedge. They can hedge in the onshore market, or they can hedge also in the offshore markets.
Isn't there a follow-up restriction starting in January 2016 that says any local issuers has to have a double B rating, and any refinancing yield has to be at or below what the current refinancing debt is? Does that raise the bar pretty quite high?
Yeah, I think this is also the benefit for creditors and investors, yeah, because if we as a monetary authority and if we have mandate for stability, yeah, if we don't have a good record about offshore debts, then people will question. That's happened 15 years ago in 1998. Now we have a good record of offshore debts, but we found out that the hedging practice of the offshores, I mean of the corporate market is not good enough. Yeah, so that's why we introduce hedging regulations, and then we also introduce rating. Yeah, I think that's for the benefit of the investment community.
Hi. As President Jokowi is trying to make quite radical changes in government, which institution in government you see is giving the most resistance? Is it in law enforcement, for example, or tax collection? And how would you go about solving that? Which area of department are we seeing the biggest resistance to the cultural shift?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Which area in government you think is giving you the biggest resistance in terms of the cultural shift that President Jokowi is trying to implement?
I think in general, anything related to the law enforcement, I think needs to adjust to the new style of the government, because in the past, for example, in terms of the tax collection, I mean, if I can come back to the issue of the tax collection, why the tax collection or tax revenue in the past is relatively low with the low tax ratio, because at that time there is no support, for the government, especially from the law enforcer to the tax office. There are a lot of so-called criminalization against the tax officials while they are doing their job, and they have to face with tough taxpayers. Usually these taxpayers will collaborate with the police, with the attorney, and as a result, they criminalize back the tax officials. So of course, at the end, especially on the last 2 years, there is no motivation of our tax officials to collect tax, especially if you are dealing with difficult taxpayers. You basically give up and then just accept any amount they pay, without challenge. So this time around, President gave a full of support, and of course, from time to time, President has to remind all the law enforcers, mostly police and attorney, try to be more cooperative with the tax officials, because at the end, the ultimate goal is the government revenue, rather than discussion about who's blaming what in terms of the tax collection itself. So I believe it will take some time, but so far I think President has built, a good communication with the law enforcement, especially to support the tax office.
So my question is, so as the country is trying to focus on stability, so without reducing the interest rate, do you think there is further room for corporate financing rate, so bank lending rate, for example, to reduce? And at the same time, as we come to the ACE, I guess one thing that people talk about is the integration of SOE banks. And do you think so we need that to make a banks more competitive, but do you think that would actually help the government influence the corporate lending rate, or it would be a problem because it reduces the competition in the banking industry?
Maybe you are in a better position to answer.
I think this is you're referring to the government's asking for lower lending rate. The way we see is this is maybe just when at the beginning of the government, okay, that to see that if it is better if lower lending rate, but then it's come again the reality. The reality is it has to be free market mechanisms, and all the state banks are already listed companies, yeah. And then and the government also has a tax revenue targets. So lower lending rate, which that's only while the environment is still need to contain inflation and current account deficit, maybe that will send conflicting signals. Yeah. So I think it's all depend on the bank's management, and so far is I think just let the market works.
Yeah, I think government will not intervene in terms of the setting up of the interest rate, but for sure we want to maintain the inflation at lower rate, because I think one of the problem why the lending rate in Indonesia is still high, starting from the high inflation. I mean, if you still have inflation above 5%, then it's hard to have the low lending rate. So what government is doing is how to reduce the inflation rate. I think that's one thing. And second thing, of course, through our Financial Services Authority, we want the banking sector to be more efficient, including in their risk premium. So somehow they should be able to reduce their net interest margin that now is a little bit high, but partly because of this high risk premium. And other than that, of course, we are going to continue providing so-called the low cost of fund, but only for infrastructure projects. If the source of financing from loan, bilateral, multilateral, the soft lending rate, as well as the Indonesian Infrastructure Bank that will be established sometimes this year, that will provide some kind of relatively low interest rate, but simply only because of the infrastructure project. So in general, government will not intervene in terms of the commercial bank interest rate, lending rate.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question.
Sorry, Pak Bambang. You were talking about that you want to try to attract more FDI coming into the country, right? But at the same time, you have this uncertainty in the rupiah, and plus on the tax regulation as well, since you want to increase more tax revenues, and also to add on the possible intervention by the government, like what we've seen in the cement sector. Any comment from your side, Pak Bambang?
Sorry, can you repeat the later part?
The intervention by the government on the cement sector.
Oh, okay. I think, I think there might be a miscommunication or misunderstanding. Government didn't interfere with the cement price. In fact, this is just a government concern with some industry. And one of the industry is cement industry. Because if you look at the structure of cement industry in Indonesia, it's simply like a cartel. They can decide on the price on their own. And I think it's not good. And unfortunately, part of this cement industry, the big one is the state-owned enterprise. So basically, the government has a concern, President especially, that if you are state-owned enterprise, then you should be partly agent of development. So that's why the cement Indonesia basically is willing to reduce the price. It's just a miscommunication because it's announced by President as if government intervened. But actually there is no intervention. It has been well calculated by the cement Indonesia itself. So I can assure you in the future there will be no government intervention in the market that already, sectors that already market-based, especially Cement Indonesia is already public listing company.
Okay. I think I might ask one very short question which might have some personal interest from the audience here.
Yeah.
Are you allowing foreigners to buy property in Indonesia? We can get orders after that from the audience.
Well, we are still in discussion, not yet, but from regulatory point of view, it is possible. Only the implementation, because if you have kind of umbrella of regulation, then you still need kind of implementing regulation. So we are still discussing about that, but if there is a relaxation in that area, it will be only for apartment rather than landed house, and it will be at some threshold. So it won't be medium to low level of apartment, but mostly upper level of apartment. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. I think it's been very informative discussion from Pak Mirza and Pak Bambang. Thank you very much for attending once again, and thank you for the questions.